Hello, everyone. We had some technical difficulties with the live stream we just did. It was cutting in and out and freezing. About halfway through, I had to stop. So if you were on that live stream, I sincerely apologize. We had a lot of super chats. So Sebastian had a great idea. He said, why don't you go just videotape or record you answering those super chats again and get to the people that I maybe already answered, but also the super chats I didn't get to. I'm going to upload it to YouTube right now so you can still get those questions answered tonight. So I'm going to dive right in. The first super chat was Stay Curious. Stay Curious, thank you for the super chat. You asked, how long until we see more housing inventory? A long time, because you've got to think, in order for there to be more inventory, you've got a lot of regulatory hurdles. You've got demand issues there, which could be gone because of the CERVEZA sickness. So a lot of moving parts, and you've got to get people out of their homes to actually build, to do the work, to take the risk as an entrepreneur. And I think over the next, call it at least 3 months, you're not going to see any housing inventory built. Now, there could be people selling, but I would assume that would be low as well, because very few sellers are going to want to sell into this market because there's just no buyers. They're thinking to themselves, I'm going to wait till this whole thing blows over, then I'm going to put my house on the market to get that premium price that I was expecting just 30 days ago prior to the CERVEZA sickness taking over the whole world. So also I'd want to add, stay curious, that you've got to remember real estate prices are like a giant ship. They don't just crash overnight like the stock market. It takes a long time for those sellers to start adjusting down their price and for the buyers and the seller to come to kind of an equilibrium. That takes months most often. So I think you're trying to get at what is the home price or what the average price is going to do over the near term. And I think we'll just kind of have a freeze. And then longer term, we'll just have to see how much of a recession, or hopefully not a depression, but it could be that, how long and how severe that is. Baxter, thank you for the super chat. Says, I'm buying the stocks Jim Cramer suggested, and so far I am 50 points in the red. What should I do? And this is a question I answered already, but Baxter, stop watching CNBC. Stop watching Jim Cramer. You can do it for entertainment purposes, but whatever you do, don't make stock selections on anyone's advice or a tip. You've got to start by asking yourself, is it cheap? Is it expensive? If so, then you buy it based on its historical average adjusted for inflation, or the cash flow relative to what you would normally get on a treasury. That's where you have to start. You're already 50 points down. So if it were me, I would just cut my losses and try to start from scratch with a more, well, I don't want to say a better mindset, but with a different mindset that asks different questions first. Forget about asking the question, which is all Jim Cramer does. Is it going up or down in price? Just completely forget that question. Again, you start, is it cheap? Is it expensive? Go from there. Zoomer, thank you for the super chat. Don't you think U.S. will come out stronger out of the end of this and real estate market will boom due to low interest rates? I absolutely 100% do not think that. The U.S. could come out stronger. My guess is they won't, because they didn't take it as seriously as they should have at the beginning. You'll notice countries that kind of were nonchalant about this, i.e. Europe, are really struggling. And the countries that really took the bull by the horns right off the bat, like South Korea, Singapore, they've done very well on flattening out that curve, which I'm sure all of you have heard Dr. Chris Martenson reference on his videos. So I hope I'm wrong, but I would assume that the U.S. has a I would assume the U.S. looks more like Spain and Italy than Singapore, unfortunately. As far as the real estate market, no, because although I would agree lowering interest rates does give some tailwind to the market because it makes those mortgage payments cheaper. But you've got to remember what else has gone on, that home prices are at all-time highs. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the mortgage payments would be cheap even at 0% interest. The income has not kept up with the price, especially in these coastal markets. You guys know the ones I always talk about, the cyclical markets. But now it's even getting kind of bad in those linear markets as well. At some point in time, the home prices have to adjust back to their historic average. Going back to 1900, you guys know the chart that I always reference, adjusted for inflation, make sure of that. But I just don't see a boom because lowering the interest rates from an economic standpoint, what is that supposed to promote? That is supposed to bring demand from the future into the present. Well, how much more demand can we bring in from the future? Who is sitting on the sidelines at a 4% interest rate saying, darn it, if I could only get 20 more basis points, if I get it down to 3.8, then I would definitely pull the trigger. No one's really saying that. And at a certain point, mortgage rates don't exactly follow the 10-year. We could have a situation where the 10-year is going down and mortgage rates might not budge. So I don't think that the mortgage rates are going to affect the monthly payment enough to make it affordable for enough people to get that boom or that massive increase in demand that you might be expecting. So I would be surprised if the real estate market is at the same level in a year. And I would assume that it would be lower, if anything, in the next year, because it just, at some point in time, the prices have to match up with the income. And the income has done this, and the prices have done this. Master Meep, thank you for the super chat. Trump emphasizing Chinese virus. Do you think we are setting them up as a scapegoat in order to go to war when our economy collapses further? Unfortunately, this is kind of the standard operating procedure, not just for the United States, but a lot of countries, but we're very good at it. In the sense that when we have a problem or an issue, we always look at the other guy. Well, it's got to be those foreigners. They've got a different religion. They smell funny. They eat different food. They're completely different. And I think it's a little worse for Americans because, unfortunately, not a lot of Americans go outside of the country to see that whether you're in Europe, you might be in Africa, Australia, in all these Asia somewhere. People, yeah, on the margin are different, but as a whole, listen, they're just like you. They're going to be pretty hardworking. They're going to put their family first as far as their priorities, their spouse, their kid. 90% of it's pretty much the same. So but it's a neat scapegoat to your point. I hate it. I don't like it. I think it's a flaw in the human condition, if you will. But it is what it is. We can be very tribal, unfortunately. And I don't know if Trump is emphasizing the Chinese thing on purpose. I don't know. I don't really get into the name thing. I know that that's in the media right now in the United States. That's like a big deal. I think we got bigger fish to fry. I don't care if you want to call it the alien virus, the Indian virus, the US virus, the George virus, the CNBC virus. I don't care what you call it. That's just, if we're worrying about that as opposed to the virus itself, we're taking up way, way, way too much mental bandwidth that should be allocated to really solving the problem. It's like your house being on fire and you worrying about the toilet being clogged. Probably not a good use of your time. Chadism, thank you for the super chat. Would you go long the dollar, farmland, or buy gold? This is where we've got to get in the right frame of mind. So we want to eliminate the question, is it going up in price or down in price? And ask, is it cheap or is it expensive? So the dollar right now, is it cheap? No, it is not cheap, historically speaking. That doesn't mean I disagree with Brent Johnson or Jeff Snyder. I mean, these guys know 100 times more than I do on the topic. It's just that I don't think we should put ourselves in that category. We're not professional investors. We don't do this for a living. My point is, guys like Brent and Jeff, their job is to try to figure out where the dollar is going over the next 3 months. That's extremely difficult to do. Either of them, I think, would admit that in a heartbeat. We're never going to be that good. I know I'm not. So all I can do is forget what's going on in the next 3 months. I like to think about it, and I like to pay attention to it. I like to understand it. But as far as me actually allocating my portfolio, I'm looking 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. That's really all I can handle with any type of confidence. So then the question becomes, is the United States dollar cheap, historically speaking, when I look out over the next 5 years or 10 years? No, it's not. So I'm not a buyer, plain and simple. Moving on to farmland, I think that could be extremely interesting. I would warn you against going into property that could be illiquid. That's a big mistake that I made when I first got into real estate, and I'm much prefer to buy already built residential properties because they're throwing off cash flow and they're far more liquid. They have two buyers. You have an investor and you have an owner occupant. With farmland, you're really going to have one buyer. That's a farmer or someone who wants to somehow use that land to produce income. So my point is, I would shy away from just land. But if it's producing farmland, maybe it's a small farm where they're growing blackberries or walnuts, or maybe a dairy farm, something like that, and it's actually throwing off cash flow, then I'd look at what they're asking per acre. I'd look at that historically, do the exact same analysis. Is it cheap? Then I'd look at that cash flow relative to what other investments I could get, or what I would consider a good return on my money, even at any point in time, whether it's during zero interest rate policy time or during Fed funds at 5 or 6. So I would want 10+%. If I get 12, 14%, 15% on, as far as positive cash flow on a piece of farmland, and per acre it's relatively cheap, historically speaking, I'm all about it. I think it's a fantastic deal. As far as gold is the only asset where I really don't ask myself that question. Is it cheap? Because I'm only buying it to maintain my purchasing power. That's it. I'm not buying it to get rich. I'm buying it to stay rich. Big, big difference. So if I make an extra $100,000 in a month or a year or whatever, I'm not asking myself what's the price of gold. I don't care. Whatever the price of gold is, I'm going to buy $10,000 worth of physical gold. With the other $90,000, then yes, I'm not, as far as an investment or speculation, I'm going to start asking those questions. But gold is unique in that aspect. So again, it's all about mindset, and hopefully that makes sense. Funding Jim, thank you for the super chat. 4 safe rental areas to buy within 6 months for cash flow. This was a difficult question for me to answer before, and because it's just so much of an unknown what's going to be happening over the next 2 or 3 months in residential real estate. Like I said earlier, most likely the prices will just freeze, and real estate prices really don't go down or up that quickly. But I've never seen this type of black swan event. Maybe this time it's different. I don't know. So if it were me, I would look at the numbers, and if it made a lot of sense right now, as far as the cash flow, the RV ratio, everything that we talk about, and I had just a perfect property, I had a motivated seller, it was just boom, this is ideal. Great neighborhood, great school district. I'd go ahead and pull the trigger, but if not, I'd hold off. Areas, of course, like Kansas City, the Missouri side, and then for the other markets, I don't have a lot of experience. What I would suggest doing is just going to my buddy's website, jasonhartman.com. He knows a lot more about other linear markets than I do. I would just see where he has inventory, and if you want to potentially buy one of his properties, great. But I would just really look at where he's doing business, and that's where I'd start. So if it's in Indianapolis, if it's a Little Rock, if it's, or else I think he might be in an area in northern Florida. I'm not quite sure, but that's where I'd start looking, is Jason's website, just to get market ideas. But to be clear, if I didn't have an absolutely perfect property lined up right now, I would hold off at least 2 or 3 months to see how this starts to play out. Because the last thing you want to do is buy something right now if the United States goes into a situation like Italy. Hi, Visual Viz Economist. Thank you for the super chat. I think this might be very important. S&P and Dow up 0.75 today. NASDAQ up 2.3%. Russell up 7%. I have never seen this divergence. Did Fed equity purchases do this? Would Fed only buy domestic companies? Potentially. I think, in fact, before I answered this question, and I thought you meant, I didn't know, you might be implying they might not buy multinationals. So I think I might have got that, or I might have misunderstood that earlier. But I definitely think they're going to want to buy companies who are domiciled in the United States. That's for sure. As far as them getting specific on the Russell, I don't know. And I was going through the 4-letter acronyms for my video tomorrow, and one of them is the PDFC, and that's a primary dealer, or I'm sorry, it might be the PDCF, I believe. So primary dealer credit facility. Excuse me. This is where they start to buy any asset from the primary dealers, including stocks. And to me, it's pretty much obvious that this is a plunge protection team type of strategy. They're not saying that. They're just saying that, oh, it's just temporary. We're just going to take some assets off the primary dealer's balance sheet to add liquidity to the system. But if you look at what actually happens to the balance sheet, the Fed or the primary dealers could buy shares in XYZ company. That goes on to they do that with excess reserves. That goes onto their balance sheet. Then they say, hey, Fed, we need to go to the primary dealer credit facility and we need to lend you, or we need to borrow money against these shares. So what ends up happening? The Fed prints money. The cash goes onto the balance sheet of the primary dealers. And where do these stocks go? They go to the balance sheet of the Fed. So how is that not the Fed buying shares? Now, a Steve Leisman would say, oh, no, it's just temporary, George, just temporary. Don't worry, just temporary. Okay, so is quantitative easing. That was just temporary, right? And what was quantitative easing? That's when the Fed was buying assets, treasuries, or mortgage-backed securities from the primary dealers. Same thing. It was just supposed to be this temporary thing, and they're not buying them. No. Because it's just going to be on our balance sheet for a couple months, and we're going to sell them right back into the market just when things calm down a little bit. All right, well, that was 2008. It's now 2020, 12 years later, And a lot of those treasuries are still, in fact, most of those treasuries are still on the Fed's balance sheet. So how did they not just buy those treasuries? I think you could see the exact same thing happen with all of the shares that they put onto their balance sheet as collateral from the primary dealers. And that if the shares continue to go down, the primary dealers and everyone else is going to have 100 cents on the dollar, and those assets will just continue to go down as well. They'll just continue to go down on the Fed's balance sheet. And since they don't have a profit or loss, who cares? I think that's kind of the game plan here.